Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the 27th lecture of the course Management, Organizational Policies and Practices. Let's have a recap of lecture 26, wherein we had an overview about what is organizational culture, how it is developed, how it is defined, and what are the different common characteristics of different organizations' cultures. Right, so every organization has its own culture, and the culture also forms the identity of that organization. And based on that culture, the organizations, they can be distinguished. For example, some organizations, they are very much they are production oriented. Some organizations are employee oriented. Some are innovative organizations who promote risk taking, and some are very stable organizations. Right. Then we discussed the different functional and dysfunctional effects of organizational culture on the people and the organization. What are the different benefits that the organizational culture has or can have for the organization in ways that it gives direction for for a uniform employee behavior, and it sets limits and boundaries on the individuals to behave in certain ways and not behave in certain ways. So it informs the employees on what are the sanctioned behaviors and what are the desired behaviors. Then it also defines boundaries between one organization and the other organizations, right? And a strong culture also is reported to increase the employee commitment, employee productivity, employee satisfaction, because when the culture is strong, we discussed that a strong culture, it comes from the strong signals from the organization. A culture is said to be strong when there is a consensus among the managers on particular values and on particular decisions, and when there is consistency, and when there is the practices, they are consistent with each other, they're supporting each other, the different practices that are being used by the organization, then that is consistent, and those practices are distinct as well. The employees see the distinct values from all those different practices. So all these factors, they help determine the cultural strength in the organization. The stronger the culture in the organization, the more likely it is that the employees they do not receive conflicting signals from the organization, from the managers in the organization, and the more likely it is that it is going to be less ambiguous for them, and things are going to be more clear for them, message is going to be more clear for them, and there is going to be better implementation of the organizational policies and strategies, and the employees are expected to behave in the expected directions, in the desired directions, because the signals are coming strong from the top management or the organization, and that is also going to result in higher productivity, better performance, and more commitment and satisfaction of the employees. So that is the functional aspect of culture that we studied. Then we also studied the dysfunctional aspect of culture. So dysfunctional effects of culture, they appear in the form of the different barriers that this culture or the strength of a culture that poses for the organization. When the culture is strong and it is really predominant in the organization, it has a number of barriers to offer for the organization and the employees, such as for the managers themselves. They are more resistant to bring the change in the organization because of the resistance that they expect from the culture of the organization, the already set and defined values and the norms and the systems and the routines of the people and the organization from a long period of time that have been established. It is difficult for the managers to challenge them and to change them, so that it itself poses a barrier for the managers. So that is the first resistance, and that is the first dysfunctional aspect of the culture. And there are other dysfunctional aspects too that we had studied, such as how culture it causes a barrier to diversity, because the managers when they have that, on the one hand, when they because of the mobility of labor, it is a challenge for the managers to hire the diverse workforce, right, and from the multicultural multicultural backgrounds and very diverse demographics, those people, they pose an opportunity for the organization, but as well as they are a challenge for the organization as well. They are the opportunity because they these people can bring in new and different ideas, but they are a challenge because of the cultural barriers, right? And because of the set norms and the established procedures and ways of doing things in the organization, or because of the set organizational culture, the culture of some of these people of different backgrounds and varied cultures, they may not match with them, and as a result there might be a disparity in what is expected behavior from those people, and they to stay in the organization, they might have to change their behaviors, they might have to change their ways, their attitudes, and as a result they may lose what was their strength on account of diversity, and the organization may not reap the benefits of diversity. So, right, so that is one of the dysfunctional aspect of culture. Then we also discussed that the culture is a barrier, or it can be a barrier towards this core competencies and towards the sustaining the competitive advantage based on core competencies, because of this this inherent inertia in the organization, which is coming from the organizational culture, the structural inertia that it initiates within the organization. As a result of that, the organization is not able to continuously adapt itself with the same pace as that it is required from the external environment, and as a result it may fall in strategic drift because of the core competencies converting into core rigidities for the organization. So there were a few aspects of the organizational culture that we considered that are dysfunctional. Then we also saw the different factors that create and sustain an organization's culture. We saw that how it is formed, right? And we discussed that it starts off, the process of the formation of organizational culture, it starts off with the founder member's assumptions and his beliefs and his ideas and what he wants and what he thinks of the organization, how it wants the organization to become. So according to his desires and his aspirations and keeping in mind his assumptions, he starts the whole process and of hiring the employees, and that process, the selection of the employees that begins, and then the employees are socialized in the ways that promote the aspirations of the founders of the organization, right? And so the commitment of the management or the top management, the behaviors of the top management, how they serve as role models, what they do, the different stories and the symbols that they use in the organization. So all these aspects, they further promote or they further are the determinants of how the organizational culture is formed, right? So it is basically formed and promoted through these factors, and through the selection, the organizations, they can make sure that they hire the right persons whose values are compatible with the values of the organization. And in reference to this, we had studied a concept of person-organization fit and the person-job fit. So the organization at the time of the hiring and selection of the employees, it must make sure that the person is not only his skills and his values, they are not only in line with that particular job for which he is being hired, but also he needs to be in line with his norms and value systems should be in line with the organization's overall values and organization's overall culture. If there is a conflict between the two, then it won't be possible for the individual to stay in the organization for longer, or he ultimately might prove a wrong selection, and he might prove non-productive, and he sometimes might show very violent behaviors, or otherwise he might engage in more and more absenteeism, or he might show any behaviors that are non-productive, right? So if for example, an organization is very much innovative and risk-taking, it promotes bringing in new ideas, bringing more creative ideas in the organization, and taking more challenging and risky tasks. But the individual, on the other hand, his personality is not that aggressive, and he is basically a stable personality, and he's a kind of a type A person who only wants to achieve quantity, and he wants to achieve achieve results in as short time as possible. So this kind of people, they are basically or he is a stable nature, he's not very open to experience. Then this kind of individuals in an organization that promotes innovation, there appears to be a mismatch. So this kind of person, he may not be able to perform well in that kind of organization, even if he has the technical knowledge, technical skills, and he has the abilities to do it. But because of the difference in the personality, mismatch in the personality of the individual and the requirements by the organization, there might be a mismatch between the two, and the individual, he may have to ultimately leave the organization. Or even if he does not leave the organization, it won't be good for his self-confidence, and he may be more and more dissatisfied with the organization, and his productivity and may start falling. So we discussed that how the culture, it needs to fit with the organization, and how at the level of the selection, the organization, it can ensure that the individual fits with the organization. And we also discussed that after the selection, how during the different stages in the organization, it can ensure the cultural compatibility, such as through training. The organizations can provide the formal or informal trainings, and we discussed a number of options that are available within the organization, through which they can familiarize employees with the organizational culture, and they can promote the compatibility with the organization's culture. So then we had a discussion that we also saw the different stages of the socialization process that are followed in the organization, which such as the pre-arrival stage, wherein the individual at the level of the university or at the level of his business school, for example, wherein he is familiarized with the different job requirements and the different job markets. If the individual is in a business school, and if he, after his finishing his studies, he has to go to a business to a business industry, then he will be familiarized with the values, and he might be paid a visit to the different sectors wherein he can wherein there are requirements for business graduates, and he might be seeing that how the work is done there and what is the environment there, etc. And the different organizations, they also hire the individuals from certain business schools. They do their hirings whom they think that what they are teaching is in line with the culture of their organizations, and the individuals, they will be socialized at the pre-arrival level as per their desires and as per their needs. So there is a pre-arrival stage, and then we also had a discussion of the encounter stage, wherein the individual actually enters the organization and encounters what is the organizational culture and what are its norms and expectations, and vis-a-vis the individual's own. And then finally we discussed the metamorphosis stage, wherein he assimilates with what is the requirement from the organization, or he leaves the organization. And then we had a discussion that how the organizations, or how an ethical culture can be created in an organization, and the right ways of doing things that should be promoted, and the wrong ways, they should be discouraged, even if they are lawful. Then describe a positive organizational culture, and we also see that how national culture differs from the organizational culture, and we saw that this national culture, that is basically above this organizational culture, and we saw this with the help of an example. So this was it we discussed for the lecture 26 on the organizational culture, its transformation, its development, its origin, and why it is formed, what are the functionalities and dysfunctionalities of the culture, what is ethical, what is positive culture. This was our discussion for the 26 lectures. Now let's have a look at what is the topic for today and what is the outline for today. Today we are going to see this conflict, negotiation and stress management. Objectives for today's lesson are: first we'll be seeing what is conflict, then we'll differentiate between the traditional human relations and interactionist views of conflict, then we'll see then we'll outline the conflict process, then we'll come to negotiation and we'll see what is negotiation. We'll be contrasting the distributive and integrative bargaining. Then we'll apply the 5 steps in the negotiation process, and we'll see how individual differences influence negotiations. We'll also assess the roles and functions of the third-party negotiations. We'll describe cultural differences in negotiations. Okay, so conflict is basically a process that begins when one party perceives that another party has negatively affected or is about to negatively affect something that the first party cares about. So at that point is an ongoing activity when an interaction crosses over to become an inter-party conflict, right? So it is conflict is the perceptions in the eyes of a party that the other party has negatively affected the first party, right? And the other party has negatively affected the first party on something that it cares about, right? So something that is important for one party, that party perceives that the other party has influenced it on that point. Right, so this is about perceptions and feelings. This is important to note here. And when we see the conflict process in the next slides, then we'll see that how these perceptions and the feelings, they are important. Then it encompasses a wide range of conflicts that people experience in organizations, such as incompatibility of goals, differences over interpretations of facts, disagreements based on behavioral expectations, right? So the different individuals, they can have different goals. There can be incompatibility of goals, which can bring in conflict between the two members. So, for example, when the resource allocations take place in the organizations, then the two divisional managers, for example, a conflict might arise between them because if they are self-sufficient divisions, or if they are no profit no loss, or the self-autonomous divisions, then in that case, those organizations, their managers, they would like to get maximum. Each manager will would like to get maximum share of the resource allocations for his division, and that there the point of conflict might arise, because each manager believes that it is a zero-sum game, that the one manager is going to gain at the expense of the other manager. So if the loss in the resource allocations for one divisional manager will ultimately mean the gain in the allocations of the other manager, right? So that can be then there can be conflict. Then if of course the goals, they are not they're in conflict with each other. For example, one manager, he's promoting a certain idea or a certain mission for his own goal achievement, which he for his own personal goals, for his vested interests, if he believes that that is why he's encouraging a certain kinds of ideas or goals or mission in the organization, and the other manager, he has a different goals and vested interests in his mind, and for that he is promoting certain ideas. So then there can be conflict between them too. Then there can be differences over interpretations of facts that can lead to this conflict. For example, for one manager, a decline in sales of $10 a month, or for 1 month, that may not mean anything, right? That may not mean a loss, and because he might think that because of the change in the mission or in the orientation of the company, or because of the long-term strategy of the company, or because of the product development, the company has lost the $10 sales, and it would be able to reinstate those sales in a long term, or in a couple of months from the advertisements, and or when the product is developed and when it is perceived in the eyes of the customer. And while the other person or the other manager, he may think that it is really of strategic nature, this downfall of $10 in the sales of the company, that is of strategic nature, and as a result, the conflicts, they might arise between the two parties when they are interpreting the facts differently. Similarly, we see that in the development of the visions in the organization at the top level, where the CEO and the top managers, they get the input from the different mid-level and the higher level managers on the development of the vision. Again, there can be conflict between the two. between all the different managers on how they interpret the external factors and the environmental factors, and how they interpret their own strengths and their own weaknesses and the internal factors, and how they carry the internal assessment. So the results from the same data from the internal and the external assessments can be interpreted differently by different managers, and that can cause conflict between the managers. Then the disagreements based on behavioral expectations, that can also be there. Okay, then the transitions in conflict thought. There is the view of conflict, and the research or the data on the conflict, it gets back, or the idea on conflict, it gets back to the traditional view of conflict. And the view was that not all conflict is harmful and must be that all conflict is harmful and it must be avoided. So this view was prevalent from 1930s till 1940s. And as it indicates that according to this, in an organization, whenever a conflict arises, it is always harmful for the organization and it must be avoided, because the conflict, according to this view, resulted from the poor communication between the employees or between the managers or between any two parties. There is not good communication between them too. There is lack of openness between the parties, between the employees. They are not maybe very much participative. They are not very sharing, or they are not very open. They are hiding their views, hiding their stances, or so on. They are not very clear. So that is why the conflict arises between the two, and the failure to respond to employee needs. So these are the different factors that result in the conflict in the organization. Then was presented this human relations view of conflict, which came in late 1940s, and it remained till mid 1970s. So this view prevailed for almost 30 years, and the belief was that conflict is a natural and inevitable outcome in any group, right? And because this view, as the human relations, the name of the view indicates, that according to this view, when the two employees in an organization, or any two people in the organization, when they interact with each other, it is very much likely and logical and rational that the differences can arrive and the conflicts can arise between those individuals or the employees who are dealing with each other. So there is nothing there is nothing bad about the conflict, or there is nothing unnatural about the conflict arising. So it means that it is not it is not necessarily on account of poor communication, or it is not necessarily on account of a lack of openness between the parties, or poor communication between the parties, but it can even with good communication and even with openness between the parties, a conflict can still arise when they are dealing with each other, right? And the view stated that the belief that conflict is not only a positive force in a group, but that it is absolutely necessary for a group to perform effectively. So that was the view that was given by the interactionists. They were one step further the human relations view, right? And human relations view, as we see that it is one step ahead of the traditional view of conflict, which necessarily viewed every type of conflict as bad. Compared to that, the human relations view, it said that the conflict can arise between the individuals, and it also said that it's not necessarily always bad. So but the interactionist view, they believe that the conflict is it is not only that the conflict is not bad, but sometimes but a positive but a certain level of conflict in the organization can increase the group effectiveness. So that was the view that was given by the interactionists, and that is the view that is prevalent now, right? So this view basically distinguished the conflict into two forms. One is the functional conflict, and the other one is the dysfunctional conflict. So the functional conflict is the conflict that supports the goals of the group and improves its performance, whereas the dysfunctional conflict is a conflict that hinders group performance, right? So they basically distinguished between the two forms of conflict. They said that all type of conflict is not necessarily always bad for the organization, but it can also benefit to the organization. Now, which type of conflict can benefit the organization and which is bad for the organization? For that, they divide the conflict into the functional and the dysfunctional. And the functional is what that supports the goals of the organization and the group, and they improve the performance. And the dysfunctional is that hinders the group performance and is not good for the group and for the organization. So then they describe 3 types of conflicts and then categorize them into functional and dysfunctional conflict. The first one is the task conflict. So according to this view, the task conflict is a conflict over the contents and goals of the group of the work. Right, and so it is basically task related, as the name indicates. It is only particularly related to the contents of the task, how it is the contents of the task and the goals of the task, right? And the view states that low to moderate levels of conflict, they are functional. So when it comes to task conflict, so even the moderate level of task conflict is functional for the is functional, and it is good for the performance of the group and the organization. Because according to this view, when the individuals or the employees, they disagree over the contents of the task, then they basically are arguing with each other. They are giving the positive and negative points of their own arguments, and as a result, the nature of the task and the contents of the task, they can be improved, right? So because of their agreements and disagreements over certain points, and because of the debate arising between them, the functional aspect of the task can be improved, and the contents of the task, they can be improved, and as a result, the performance can be improved, right? But not very high levels of conflict should be there. The task conflict should be there, but they should range between low and moderate. And the relationship conflict is a conflict which is based on the interpersonal relationships. That is when you get personal over the things which are not task related, right? So as a result of those interpersonal differences, and these are the kind of differences that can arise because of the poor communication, because of lack of trust between the individuals, or because of the lack of understanding between the individuals, or between the manager, or between the manager and the subordinate, etc. So this kind of relationship conflict, that is dysfunctional in nature. So that is almost always dysfunctional. Even a low level of this type of interpersonal conflict is dangerous for the organization, and it is dysfunctional for the organization, and lowers performance, because then individuals they start getting personal with each other, and their attention and their focus on the task and on the activity itself, it reduces, and they more start indulging into this interpersonal politics and interpersonal conflicting relations, and such kind of wins and losses, right? So that is why this conflict is always dysfunctional. But in a study, it is reported that almost 16-17% of the managers, they spend their time on dealing with these relationship conflicts. So you see that how much managers' time is wasted on dealing with the relationship conflict, right, which is totally dysfunctional in nature. Then we have this process conflict, which is the conflict which over how work has to be done. What are the processes that are to be used? How the work is going to be designed? How the jobs are going to be allocated? So this is all process, right? That how the work processes are going to be designed, how the work is going to be designed, etc. Right? So who will do what task? Who will report to whom? What will be the chain of command? What will be the hierarchy in the hierarchy? Who will be the managers, and to whom the employee has to report, and who will do what task after what, in what order the task will be done, and so on. So all these are the issues which are related to the process, that how the work will be done. So this kind of conflict, again, the low levels of process conflict, they are functional, because when you discuss these different matters, and when you have a conflict over these different matters, but to a low level, then again chances are there that you can design the processes that are more efficient, and that are faster, and that are better, right? But if that conflict again rises to the moderate level or the high level, that is not going to work well, and that is not going to be very functional for the organization and for the group. Okay, now let's see what the conflict process, that how the conflict, the process of how this conflict starts, and what is the end to this conflict process. Stage 1 is the potential opposition or incompatibility. So when between the two parties there is lack of communication, and as a result they are not they are not very comfortable with each other, right? And as a result there is incompatibility between the two parties, and as a result there is certain difficulties in communication, and there is misunderstanding, and there is this unnecessary noise. Then that is the stage 1 of this conflict process, where the conflict starts arising, right? So when a person who is not, for example, a subordinate who is not very happy with his manager, because whenever he goes to his manager and he's very annoyed at even every little thing and every little task, or the way he behaves is not, he does not respect the other person, or there are not good interpersonal relationships between the manager with his subordinate. He does not treat his subordinates with respect and with trust and things like that. Then it means that a subordinate and a manager, they may not be at good wavelength with each other, and as a result the misunderstandings, they start arising between the two, or there is noise between the communication of the two parties. So this kind of difficulties, they can arise because of the structure of the job, such as if there are two people in the organization, or if there are two employees in the organization, and one is the credit manager and the other one is the sales manager. Now the sales manager is responsible for doing the sales and for bringing in the accounts, maximum accounts as possible. Now if the sales are basically on credit, then of course any sales that has to be made by the sales manager, they have to be approved by the credit manager because the sales are to be made on credit, right? Now there are chances that the conflict can arise. There is a potential of conflict between the two parties, because the sales manager wants to increase the accounts, the number of customers to whom he has sold the products or the services, right? So he wants to increase that number. He wants to increase his sales because they might be tied to his commission. And on the other hand, the credit manager wants to, he's because responsible for the bad debts and for the accounts receivables. Therefore, he does not want to increase the accounts on bad debt. Therefore, he would be very much careful in approving those accounts, or in approving those customers or those sales. Therefore, if the sales manager, he brings in one client and the credit manager rejects that client, then there is a potential source or there is a potential for conflict between these two parties that is structured in nature, because both their tasks, they are interdependent in nature, and this interdependence, it can bring the conflict in their conflict between themselves, right? And then where there is where there is not jurisdictional clarity, or where there is ambiguity, such as that what is in your jurisdiction and what is in my jurisdiction, things are not clear and they are ambiguous, there is role ambiguity, then again there are chances of conflict. When there is member goal incompatibility that we discussed earlier, then when the goals, they are not in line with the members' goals and the organization goals, when they are not in line and you are asked to do certain things, or you are supposed to do certain things, then there can be conflict between those. Then the leadership styles, they can also be a source of conflict or not, whether you are participative leader, or what kind of leader you are, your autocratic leader, and the styles or the behaviors of the individuals or the subordinates, then what do they expect, as we studied in detail in the leadership models, that how in different cultures, for example, in some organizations they are basically very much supportive of this participative leadership styles, but if the manager does not use that style of leadership, then the employees, there are chances that the conflict can arise between them. Then the reward systems, that can also bring in this potential opposition between the two members, or that can be bring in incompatibility in the communication, because as I explained, gave you the example earlier, that if I believe that the increment that my colleague is getting, there is either he can get an increment or I can get an increment, right? So of course then there is a potential for conflict between the two of us. But when on the other hand, I believe, or I feel that the pool, the money pool from which the increments are to be given, if it can be increased and thus both of us can get the increment, then there won't be any potential of conflict between the two of us. Right, so again, if the degree to which the groups are interdependent, the chances of conflict are higher, right? If there is no interdependence between the groups, and the chances are that there won't be much conflict between the groups. Then a number of personal variables, they can also be responsible for bringing in this conflict, such as the different individual value systems. My value system might be different from my manager's value system, and there are chances what he thinks ethical or right, I do not think ethical or right, or I cannot justify that, and vice versa. Then the different personality types. There's some personalities, some individuals are more prone to conflict and compared to some other individuals. So for example, the individuals who are high on agreeableness, they tend to be less in conflict, or the individuals who are very extroverts, they also tend to be less in conflict because they are very sociable. And the highly agreeable individuals, they are basically more concerned about what others think and what others say compared to their own selves, right? So the different personality types, they can also determine the expected the potential of the conflict between the two parties or more. Then the second stage is cognition and personalization. This stage is important because of the two reasons. One, at this stage the conflict is defined, and the other stage the conflict is felt. The other reason is that the conflict is felt at this stage. So because of these two reasons, this stage is important. First, if there is a potential of conflict between the two parties because of all the different factors that we discussed earlier, it is important for the conflict process to begin, or for the conflict to be there, that it is perceived. Of course, if something is there is something unfavorable, or there is something disturbing between the two parties, or something not comfortable between the two parties, then one or two parties, unless and until they perceive that there is something uncomfortable between them, of course the conflict, it cannot be begin, or it cannot be defined. So it is the awareness by one or more parties of the existence of the conditions that create opportunities for conflict to arise, right? If there are differences between those two parties over certain issues, but those differences are not perceived by them, right, then of course the chances are that the conflict will not arise. So second, there is this felt conflict in which the emotions are expressed that have a strong impact on the eventual outcome. When these conflicts, they turn, or when you perceive the certain conflict and you also feel that conflict, and you feel uncomfortable, or you feel bad about that conflict, so it is when that conflict or that perceptions about the other individual, when they are hitting your emotions, then you're feeling that conflict. So under the felt conflict, you have this emotional involvement in a conflict which is creating anxiety, tension, frustration, or hostility in the minds of one party for the other, or in the minds of both parties. Then the third stage is the intentions. Intentions are where the decisions to act in a given way, they are taken, and the behavior does not always accurately reflect the intentions, right? So sometimes you have certain intentions, but you do not behave that way, right? Although intentions, they are a very big indicator, very strong indicator of behavior, but they are, of course, they do not perfectly depict the behavior, right? So of course they are distinct from the behavior, and they are not 100% predictor of behavior, but they predict behavior to a greater extent, right? So this is that so the intentions, they are, one, they define your behavior, and two, these intentions, they lead you to act in certain ways, right? So they are the decisions that what you are going to do, right? So there are different dimensions of these conflict handling intentions. One is this cooperativeness, and the other one is the assertiveness. So cooperativeness is attempting to satisfy the other party's concerns, right? When you are acting cooperative, when you are cooperative, so when you intend to satisfy the other party's concerns, that is your cooperative intentions, right? And assertive is that when you are attempting to satisfy your own concerns, so you are not concerned about the other party's concerns, but you are only concerned about your own concerns. So that is the assertiveness. The more assertive you are, the more you're concerned only about yourself and not the other party. So that is the other dimension of the conflict handling intention, that what you want to do, right? Whether you are cooperative or you are assertive. So according to these dimensions, define that how the individual is going to behave under the conflict situations. Okay, then we have these, we see that these intentions, again, there are a number of intentions on the dimension of this cooperativeness and assertiveness, such as the competing, the collaborating, avoiding, accommodating, and compromising. So if we see all these dimensions with the help of this figure, we'll see that on the horizontal axis we have cooperativeness, that either you are showing completely uncooperative behavior or you are highly cooperative, right? And we have this assertiveness, that you are highly unassertive or you are highly assertive on the y-axis, right? And as per these you will adopt your certain behaviors. They would be defined from the degree of the cooperation and or the degree of the assertiveness that you have. So if you are highly uncooperative and highly unassertive, then you'll be using this avoiding strategy of conflict handling, right? So here in the avoiding, the individuals who are neither concerned to maximize their own goals or their own purposes, or not they are concerned to satisfy the others' goals or purposes. So what they do is that they adopt this kind of avoiding strategy, that if there is conflict between the two parties, try to avoid that conflict, right? And the individuals who try to basically cooperate with others, who try to listen to the others' concerns, right, and who are not concerned about their own selves, or who do not want to maximize their own concerns, but they want to maximize and they are concerned about the other party's issues and they want to solve and satisfy them, they are basically accommodating. The accommodating strategy they use, and they are the people who basically tend to accommodate others, right, to maximize their concerns. Then the individuals, the other categories is this competing strategy. Competing conflict handling strategy is used by the individuals who tend to be high in assertiveness and who tend to be low in cooperativeness, right? And so these are the individuals, on the other hand, who want to satisfy their own concerns and they are not concerned about the other party's concerns, and they don't attempt to, and they don't want to satisfy the other party's concerns, so they only want to maximize their own concerns. So they are using this competing conflict handling strategy. Then the collaborating is the other extreme, wherein the individuals, they all want to satisfy maximum of their interests as well as the maximum of the interests of the other party. So they sit together with the other party, listen to their views, listen to their ideas, listen to what they want, tell their own views, their own ideas and what they want, and then mutually they come up with the possibilities which are basically the win-win solutions for both the parties. One party does not have to give up at the cost of the other party, and they can both maximize their interests, and they can both gain from their negotiations, or they can both gain from they can both develop or devise a solution that is in best interest of both the parties, right? So they are not only concerned about their own but also about the others, and they want to collaboratively arrive at a solution which is win-win game for both the parties. Then the compromising is where you have a certain degree of both cooperativeness and assertiveness. So you are also listening to the party's views of the other party, and you're telling your own views, and by way of the negotiation and the settlement process, you are ready to give up some of your pie, and the other party is also ready to give up the share of its pie, and as a result you arrive at a compromised solution, which is mutually compromised, right? Okay, then conflict management is basically the use of the resolution and stimulation techniques to achieve the desired level of conflict. On this conflict intensity continuum, the lower levels of conflict, as we discussed earlier, they can basically be, if the conflicts are at lower level, they are more manageable for the managers than if the conflicts they arise too high and there are too much conflicts between the parties, then they become more difficult to handle, and they become more dysfunctional for the organization, right? Then there are a number of conflict resolution techniques that the organization can use, or the management can use, or how the managers they can manage this conflict. There are a number of options or number of techniques that they can use, and there are a number of techniques that are conflict stimulation techniques as well. So we'll be talking about them as well here. One technique that you can use is that, or use this problem solving approach. So instead of avoiding the problems or instead of nipping the problems, you are basically the two parties, you encourage the two parties to come up with their problems, to discuss their problems, and to bring in the solutions. The other the technique of this conflict resolution is by superordinate goals. That is, you put forward, or you put in place the shared goals for the company's shared vision for the company, and so that they mutually strive to achieve those goals. Then the expansion of resources, that as I discussed with you earlier, that if there is conflict between the two parties over who will get the increment, then you increase the resources, and so that the conflict can be resolved between the two parties. Then there is this avoidance, wherein you try to avoid, the two parties, they try to avoid, or where we know that there are two persons, they're in conflict with each other, so or over something, you just try to avoid that thing, or whatever is bringing in the conflict. Then the smoothing is where you try the two parties, they try to smooth out their differences, right, and they try to surface more and more the similarities between those parties, and they try to hide the differences. Then the compromising is where, as I told you earlier, that they try to negotiate, and they try to give up something and arrive at a compromised solution. Authoritative command is that when there is conflict between the two parties and the manager, he just gives in a decision that, okay, it should be resolved this way, or this is the solution, or this is the answer, or it should be done this way. So using his authority, his command, the manager resolves the conflict and makes a decision. Then altering the human variable, that when there is conflict between the two parties, you need to change their behavior, and that you can do by ways of trainings, or by way of counseling the employees, and by other means which can alter the behavior of the employees, so that the conflict does not arise between them. So because sometimes only the attitude problem in some individuals causes the conflict, right? So the behavior needs to be changed, because the attitude, it translates into the behavior. So those attitudes of the employees, sometimes only they need to be fixed, right? So that you can do with the help of this trainings on the conflict, and the trainings on how to deal with others. Then altering the structural variables can also lead to resolution of the conflict. We discussed a number of elements in the organizational structure and the job structure, the job design, that can cause the conflict in the organization, right? And if you alter those structural variables, such as if you alter the job design, right, and the interdependence in the groups, or the interdependence between the individuals, and so on, other structural factors that we discussed, if you alter them, that can also be an option, that you alter them, and then you help resolve this conflict. And then the communication, that can be improved, the communication trainings, they can be provided, and the conflict can be resolved by that way. So sometimes we discuss this conflict stimulation techniques. I discussed with you earlier that according to the interactionist view, a minimum level of conflict that is always functional, that proves functional, especially the task conflict and the process conflict. So unless and until there is this conflict, the organization reaches at status quo, and it becomes really the chances are that the organization will become stagnant, right, and the changes won't come in the organization, right? So in order for that, in order to bring in the changes in the organization, in order to challenge the status quo, there should be a level of conflict in order to bring in new ideas, and in order to establish and promote those new ideas, it is important there should be certain conflict. And that sometimes the organizations, when they are really start becoming stagnant because there is no conflict, as we discussed in the case of the charismatic leaders, that they basically employ the individuals, and their subordinates are always yes people, because they cannot listen no. So in that kind of circumstances, and they promote those individuals who are not who do not give rise to conflicts, and they like the organizational style of management wherein there is no conflict, right? So that kind of organizations, they sometimes they get stagnated, and such kind of the conflicts that can be stimulated in the organization by ways of bringing in the outsiders sometimes, so the people from the diverse backgrounds, or you can even hire the consultants to take their help. You can bring in the people from other different cultures so that the conflict can be promoted. Then you can bring in the structural differences in the organizations. Sometimes if there is, the groups are totally independent, and the you can create this interdependence between the groups, so that a certain conflict, it can arise between them. And sometimes you can also rotate the group members, so that you can do this intergroup rotation of the group members, so that the people from the other groups, they're coming, there is a different mix of people, and as a result the conflict that might arise between them, so and that can be functional for the organization. Then this devil's advocate, that can also be appointed in certain cases. What the managers, they do is that they appoint a certain person who is supposed to do his homework and criticize the decisions that have been made by the majority in the group, right? And so that the decision making, its process, it can be improved, and the final decisions, they can be improved. So he challenges the decisions made by the majority in the group in order to bring in the conflict into the group, so which can be which is of course the task conflict or the process conflict, and with the aim to improve the decision making and the solutions. So when the conflict is functional, we discussed that it leads to increased group performance, improved quality of decisions, stimulation of creativity and innovation. It encourages interest and curiosity, provision of medium for problem solving, and it creates an environment for self-evaluation and change. But when the conflict is dysfunctional, it leads to the development of discontent. It reduces group effectiveness, retarded communication, reduced group cohesiveness, and infighting among group members overcomes group goals. So of course, a very high level of conflict, it is going to lead to the lack of cohesiveness and lack of trust between the group members, especially when it is the relational conflict, right? And even the other types of conflicts, the task or the other conflict, when they are at very high levels, the process conflict between the individuals, again they're going to lose trust on each other, and there is not going to be that much group cohesiveness, which is very important for the smooth functioning of the group, right? And as we discussed earlier, that we need to create this functional conflict in the organizations, which we can by reward dissent and punishing the conflict avoiders, right? So the people who are the devil's advocates, we need to reward them, and the people who are who are the avoiders of the conflict, which should be they should be punished in order to create a certain level of conflict, right? Then the negotiation, we discussed this negotiation process also partly under our collective bargaining agreement, that how it happens and what are the negotiating parties. So let's have a brief discussion on this with respect to the two approaches to this negotiation, which is the distributive bargaining and the integrative bargaining. So of course we know that negotiation is a process in which two or more parties exchange goods or services, and they attempt to agree on the exchange rate for them, right? And the distributive bargaining, that is basically a way to negotiate between the two parties, in which the negotiation it seeks to divide up a fixed amount of resources. That is a win-lose situation, right? And integrative bargaining is, on other hand, the negotiation that seeks one or more settlements that can create a win-win situation, right? So these are two different forms of bargaining. And under the distributive bargaining, the both parties, they are working under the assumptions that one party will gain on the expense of the other party, or one party will lose if the other party wins. So it is a win-lose situation, and in that kind of situation, this distributive bargaining takes. For example, the bargaining that is between a prospective candidate and the interviewer, right? And in that meeting, the candidate, he knows that if the more and more salary he gets, that is to the expense of his employer, his potential employer, and the potential employer also knows that the more and more salary that candidate gets, he will be the employer, it will be more and more costly for the employer, right? So it is a win-lose situation. The employee, the prospective employee, the more he is able to negotiate and the more he is able to get, he feels that he's a winner, and the employer feels that he is a loser, and vice versa. Right. So under the two, if we make a comparison, but on the other hand, under the integrative bargaining situation, what happens is that you are trying to, there is not this win-lose situation between the two parties. The two parties enter into the negotiations with each other, and they try to, they feel that a win-win situation, a number of alternatives they can be devised, or they can be come up with, so that the both parties they can gain. So for example, if I give you a simple example, a household example, that there is one orange and there are two sisters, and they both want to have that orange, and the orange is one. So one of the sisters, under the distributive bargaining, one will think that if she gets the orange, the other one is going to lose. Right now, the one of the sisters, she wants to gets the orange because she wants to make an apple orange juice, and the other sister, she wants to get the orange because she wants to use the orange peel in the orange cake that she wants to bake. Now, under the distributive bargaining, what happens is that they have this short-term view, that they both view their problems, and they both immediately come up with this idea that if the gain of one is going to be at the cost of the loss for the other, right? So one of the two have the orange, and she gets her work done from the orange, and the other one loses. So that is the distributive bargaining. But under the integrative bargaining, they basically can transform this win-lose situation into win-win situation. When they come up, when they sit together, they see that what are the goals of, what are their goals, and what is the other's goal. They see each other's goals, they see the aspirations of each other, right? And then they try to come up with a number of possible plausible solutions with which both can benefit, and none of them has to lose, right? So what they can do is that now they need to see that what are their goals. Their goals are different, right? And with that same orange, when they think through, they both can benefit, one taking the orange peels, and the other one getting the juice from the content of that orange, right? So this is how they both can come up with a solution, and they both can create a win-win situation for they both can achieve their goals by a win-win situation, right? So this integrative bargaining happens when the both parties, they sit together, they see what are their goals, what are the solutions of problems of each party, what are the goals of each party, and then how they can arrive at the solutions, at the possible alternatives which can benefit both the parties, and it can turn into a win-win situation for both the parties. So under the different bargaining characteristics, we see with respect to the different items that vis-a-vis the distributive and the integrative bargaining. So when we see that the goal under the distributive bargaining, the goal is that you get all the pie you can, because you know that it's going to be at the expense of the other person. Then under the integrative bargaining, you expand the pie, right? So you expand the pie so that both the parties, they can benefit. So the motivation under the distributive bargaining is that win-lose, and in the integrative bargaining it is win-win. The focus under distributive bargaining is the positions, while the focus under integrative bargaining is the interests, right? And the information sharing is low under the distributive bargaining, while it is high under the integrative bargaining. So both the parties under integrative bargaining, they mutually sit together and they exchange views on all the information and all the background information that is necessary for the two parties to arrive at all the plausible solutions. The duration of relationship under distributive bargaining is short term, because of course it cannot be a long-term relationship between the two parties when you're entering into the distributive process. When one party is losing and the other party is gaining, of course it's a short-term perspective, while under the integrative bargaining, these relationships, they are long-term. When the different bargaining tactics and the bargaining zone. So under the distributive bargaining, when you are entering into distributive bargaining with the other party, you are expected to be more successful when you are going to make an aggressive first offer, right? So if we go back to our example of a potential employee and the employer, the employer, if he asks the employee that what salary he expects, then the potential employee has a chance to make a first aggressive offer or to set an anchor. So if he whatever he says, that this is his expectation, that will serve as an anchor for the remaining negotiation of theirs. Right, so that would be the base point around which they would be negotiating that offer, right? So that is, of course, if you make an aggressive offer, the chances are that you will get better returns than if you don't make that aggressive offer. So the results of the studies, they report that the individuals in this kind of job interviews, those who make very much aggressive offers, which are so aggressive that they are irrational and they are too optimistic, and the employer does not take them seriously, and he only ridicules those anchors. While on the other hand, if the efforts they are too low and or they are too pessimistic, then again it's not it won't lead to a very good outcome for the potential employee. So you need to make a reasonable offer, and you need to make an aggressive offer, but it should also be reasonable at the same time. Then you can get more reward or better share of the pie. Then you should also be revealing a deadline. For example, if a potential employer is offering the job to the employee, and the employer sees that this employee really fits in the requirements of the job, and that employee has very technical skills, and the employee says that he has offers from the alternate job offers as well, and he will make his decision later on and tell the employer. Now the employer knows that this employee, there are chances that the employer will lose this employee, right? And so the employer, what he does is that he gives a deadline to the employee that within this much period of time you need to respond, because we have to decide. If you don't tell us within this deadline, then we'll be offering this job to someone else. So when you are setting this deadline for the employer, then there is pressure on the potential employee, and then the employer can gain better outcomes from this kind of distributive tactic. Then there are a few tactics that are important in this integrative bargaining as well, such as bargain in teams. When you bargain in teams, of course, there are more ideas, better ideas, and then you can lead to better solutions. Then put more issues on the table. The more issues, the more information you put on the table, you can arrive at a better solution, and don't compromise. There are a number of individual differences in this negotiation effectiveness. One, the personality traits, such as the extroverts and the agreeable people, they are weaker at the distributive negotiation, because as I told you earlier, they are the individuals who are very sociable and who want more who are more cooperative, right? And they tend to be more cooperative and not that assertive. Therefore, these individuals, they are not good at this distributive bargaining. Right, and the people who are more disagreeable and who are introverts, they do best under this distributive bargaining. And then intelligence is a weak indicator of effectiveness. Mood and emotion also determine your negotiation effectiveness. The ability to show anger, it helps in distributive bargaining. The more anger you show, the more you are likely to get the concessions, and the better you're expected to be negotiating. And the positive moods and emotions, they help integrative bargaining, right? Because therein you have to come up with the solution which is integrative and which is good for both the parties, and which is a win-win situation for both the parties. Then the gender is how it is related to this negotiation effectiveness. Men and women, they negotiate the same way but may experience different outcomes. So because there is also a perception that the women, they may not be very good negotiators, or the women, they might negotiate differently than men, but it has been reported that they negotiate the same way. Women and men, they take on gender stereotypes in negotiations, that is tender and tough. Women are reported more to be tender in the negotiations, and the men are reported to be tough in these negotiations, and women are less likely to negotiate compared to men. Then we have a discussion on these third-party roles when the negotiations are not successful. What is the role of the mediator? That how he facilitates this negotiation process, right? By persuasion, by reasoning, and by suggestions for alternatives, but he's only suggesting. Then we have this arbitrator, who is a third party to a negotiation, who has authority to dictate an agreement, right? And of course he can arrive at he can make a decision on behalf of both the parties. And then we have this conciliator, who is a trusted third party who provides an informal communication link between the negotiator and the opponent. And we have this consultant, who is an impartial third party skilled in conflict management, who attempts to facilitate creative problem solving through communication and analysis. So the consultant, he can provide his feedback or to the manager that how they need to handle the process, or how they need to handle the solution and the conflict process, right? Then of course we see that the Japanese and the US managers, they view this conflict differently, right? US managers, they are more likely to use competing tactics, while the Japanese managers are likely to use compromise and avoidance. And the reason can be the cultural differences, because US is more individualistic society, therefore they try to maximize their own benefits, and that is why they are more assertive and they are more using their competing strategies, and they are low on cooperativeness. And the Japanese, on the other hand, they use these compromise tactics, or they try to avoid the conflict altogether. Then the multicultural process studies on negotiation styles show that American negotiators, they are more likely than Japanese bargainers to make a first offer, right? And North Americans, they use facts to persuade, Arabs use emotion, and Russians use asserted ideas, and Brazilians say no more often than Americans or Japanese. So there are different cultural differences when it comes to this negotiation process. Then of course conflict can be constructive or destructive. It depends upon the level of the conflict. And reduce effective conflict by using this competing, collaboration, avoidance, accommodation, and compromise strategies. And the integrative negotiation is of course better for long-term method and for long-term relationships, and for better outcomes for both the parties. Then we have a discussion on this workplace stress. We know that stress occurs at the workplace when your workplace is more demanding, and the resources that you have in terms of your mental resources, in terms of your physical resources, they are not matching the demands from your work, or from your work. Like you feel you are more stressed out when you feel overworked, when you are overwhelmed by workload, when you have lack of time for reflection and for meditation and for self-thinking, when you don't have time to complete the tasks, and when you are doing multitasking too much. These are all the different causes of the workplace stress that have been reported. Okay, this model, it depicts that there are different potential sources of stress which are coming from the environmental factors, such as the economic uncertainty. We have discussion that how they affects the organization, right? And they have interest rates, the changes in the inflation rates, the layoffs, the recessions, how of course they're going to affect the individual. And the political uncertainty, again the changing laws, labor laws, and other laws and regulations, they can directly impact the individual in the organization. And the technological changes, so by way of which the individual, he might feel that his skills have become obsolete, and they can increase the stress of the individual. Then the organizational factors, such as the task demands, such as the role demands. Your tasks are very much demanding, and your role demands are such that there is not role clarity, there is role ambiguity, there is work overload, and there are other interpersonal demands that are increasing the organization, the stress coming from the organizational factors. Then from the personal factors, there can be a number of reasons, such as you have your own family problems, you have the economic problems, you have low income level, the domestic income level, and you have other personalities. Sometimes the personality factors, they're also a cause of the stress. So some individuals, they are inherently emotionally unstable, so they are reported to be more under stress, or they are less intelligent, they're reported to be more under stress than the individuals who are not, right? So these are all the different factors from all these different arenas that determine the stress of the individual, right? And the consequences of this stress is the headaches, the high blood pressure, heart diseases. Then you can have anxiety, you can have depression, and you can have that decreased job satisfaction, of course. And it also indicates certain behavioral symptoms. These consequences, such as loss of productivity, more and more absenteeism, and intention to turn over, and ultimately leaving the organization when the stress level is too high and not bearable for you. We see that there is this inverted U relationship between the stress and the job performance. When the stress levels, they are too low, the performance is low. When the stress level is moderate, the performance is high. The stress levels are, again, from this figure, we can see that the stress levels are can be functional, and the stress levels, they can also be dysfunctional. So if there is low level of stress level, it's going to be it is going to be dysfunctional, because you know that when your job is not that much demanding, or your organizational factors are such that there is not much demand from you, right? So the job demands are low. When you know, then you are also going to be relaxed, and you're going to be low in your performance and low in your productivity. But when there is some certain degree of challenge in your job, then you also feel a certain degree of stress in your job. Challenging targets, challenging goals, they are a little stressful for you, and then that stress also converts into more work from you, more effort from you, and better performance and productivity from you. So moderate level of stress is related to the increased performance, whereas very low and very high levels of stress, both are related to low performance. So beyond a certain degree, if the stress increases, that is again going to reduce your performance, but up to a certain degree, if you have stress, that is going to increase your performance. Okay, then there can be different approaches by which you can manage the stress. One, the time management. For example, if you're feeling the work overload, sometimes you can cater to that work overload only through time management, setting your priorities, which tasks are more important, right? And doing them first, making your timetable, right? And prioritizing your tasks, right? And then doing your task. Multitasking can also help you reducing your stress and getting your work done. Then you can increase your physical exercise, that is reported to reduce the stress. You can do this relaxation training. You can expand your social networks. And then there can be a number of organizational factors that can help to manage the stress, such as the improved personnel selection and job placement. As we discussed earlier, that the personality factors, they can also be related to the stress, and those can be screened out in the selection process. Then individuals, they can be provided the stress trainings. Use of realistic goal setting should be there. If the goals are too over optimistic, then they can really increase the stress levels, and they can be dysfunctional. Then you can redesign the jobs. You can increase employee involvement, and the more the employees they are involved, of course, the better they will be in managing their stress. And the improved organizational communication, employees can feel more, they can more identify with the organization, and they can the roles can be clear and for them, and they can be more motivated, and their stress levels, they can deal better with the stress. Then offering employees sabbaticals, that is also can be a solution to this stress management. And the establishment of corporate wellness programs. Then I have a few questions, this one checklist for you that I encourage you to solve. So with this, we come to an end of today's lecture, wherein we had a discussion about the different conflict process, how it arises, and what are the different conflict management strategies. Then we had a discussion on the stress, what are the different determinants of stress, and how through the different individual and organizational factors, the organizations can deal with stress. Thank you for your patient hearing. I hope you enjoyed today's lecture. Allah Hafiz.